is also a constitutional lawyer. You are a brilliant lawyer as well. Is it unusual? Have you ever heard of somebody pleading guilty twice to perjury and then having their case expunged in this manner?
It's even worse than what you're saying, because he not only was charged, he pled guilty. The case is over. He was pending a sentencing. That's all that remained. So dismissing at this point is really unusual, and there is no public interest in doing so. There is one case called Cowan, where the Department of Justice tried to dismiss because they were transferring the case to another jurisdiction. It was actually a Watergate case. It was against Conley, and the witness who was going to testify against him in D.C. had a charge pending for the same kind of crime in Texas federal court. And so as part of his plea bargain, that case was to be dismissed, and the court said the public interest in having him testify justifies dismissing it. He hadn't pled guilty. It wasn't over. It wasn't pending sentencing. And there was a public interest in allowing him to be prosecuted somewhere else. This would be unheard of. This is a clear cover-up. Yeah. It's because probably Flynn knows something that Trump does not want revealed, and he's trying to protect him. So this is a big cover-up. It should be one of the biggest scandals of this administration. And because of COVID-19, we're not hearing enough about it.
Yeah. And the New York Times editorial board wrote that they called it a perversion of justice. And they said among the key reforms of Watergate were stronger transparency and ethics rules, like the creation of independent inspectors general to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in the executive branch. Mr. Trump has been firing inspectors general he thinks are not loyal to him. There were also new limits on presidential power, like the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act. And Trump broke that law last year, according to the Nonpartisan Government Accountability Office, when he withheld hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine. So, I mean, there's not as if this is an administration that very much believes in the rule of law. But I want to play for all of our guests, William Barr himself, explaining himself in a way that I think might be one of the most chilling things that I have ever personally heard from an attorney general of the United States. Take a listen.
When history looks back on this decision, how do you think it will be written?
Well, history is written by the winner, so it largely depends on who's writing the history.
Michael Isikoff and David Corn, I'm going to send this to you. You guys wrote Russian Roulette. You guys have written about this whole period and era in American history. This man, William Barr, does not seem to care about history other than that he believes that the regime will be vindicated because the regime will write the history. That's how that sounded to me.
Well, it certainly is a power makes right argument, right? That there's no concern for the greater issues at stake here. We have our history, the paperback edition's coming out in a couple of weeks, and I think we're going to keep fighting over this. But what's frustrating is that we keep fighting over some very basic details. Have you heard William Barr say anything about the fact that the Russians attacked the election in 2016 to help Donald Trump become president? Because that's what's really at the core of this. And that's the history that Donald Trump wants rewritten because it taints his presidency. And it's not just history. In February, the FBI director, Chris Wray, and just this past week, John Ratcliffe, the congressman who is an ardent Trump defender, who Trump picked to be his next director of national intelligence, have both said that the Russians are still intervening in the ongoing 2020 election. So we're not just fighting over history, we're fighting over some fundamentals about American democracy. And Barr has clearly shown that he's on the side of whatever works for Trump and not what's in the interest of American democracy.
Yeah, he's the hand of the king. Michael Isikoff, Naveed Jamali, who writes for Newsweek and is a good friend of the show, wrote the following about him. He said the threat has been neutralized. He said, here's where I'll disagree with Frank Figliuzzi, another tweet that he did. Counterintelligence is not about justice. It's about neutralizing a threat. In that regard, the counterintelligence efforts were successful in stopping the further recruitment of Flynn by Russia, meaning that getting rid of him, having him plead out, meaning he likely won't be able to serve in another administration. The warnings about him are now a threat of him. In your view, in your investigation, what threat did he pose to U.S. national security, if any?
Well,
I want to make a couple of points. One of the extraordinary things about the decision to drop the charges against Michael Flynn is not a single career prosecutor at the Justice Department signed that motion to the judge asking that the charges be dismissed. It was signed by one man alone, Timothy Shea, the political appointee who's the U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia. It was based on a recommendation of Jeff Jensen, the U.S. attorney, the political appointee in St. Louis, and approved by Barr, a political appointee. So it is, in my many years of reading Justice Department filings, I cannot remember seeing one in which not a single career prosecutor puts his name to it. So that gives you an idea of how unusual this was. But just to get the larger context here, remember what this case was all about. It was Flynn lying about his conversations with the Russian ambassador, which were directly after Obama had imposed sanctions on Russia for its attack on the 2016 election and announced that the Obama administration was going to be kicking out multiple Russian diplomats as punishment. Flynn then tells Kislyak, don't worry about that. We'll revisit it. Please don't respond. And what leaps out to me about this is that was the first indication, first real sign that the new Trump administration was going to start undoing everything Obama had done. It started with that. It continued through the Affordable Care Act, through the climate deal, through the Iran nuclear deal. One by one, Trump seemed determined to undo everything that Obama had done, which is why I think these comments from Obama, which I should point out, we published exclusively on Yahoo News Friday night, that's where you got them, were so, leap out, because clearly Obama is speaking to, legitimate policy reasons about the rule of law, but there's also sort of a larger context of him watching Trump undoing everything that he had done as president.
Well, including turfing Flynn himself out at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Let's not forget that it was President Obama that got rid of him in the first place.
Obama he had gone to Trump during the transition, and the one personnel recommendation he made was don't hire Flynn, and
correct.
Trump obviously ignored that.
Correct. And we know, we've seen William Barr's monarchist tendencies before, his belief in absolute power, at least in the hands of a Republican president. But I want to go to you on this, Sarah, because that president, the king to whom he is the hand, always just says he just blurts out the truth. He just says out the thing, the quiet part that's supposed to be quiet. He says it out loud. Here he is doing that on Fox.